These last two exercises in our introduction to Algebra 2 level statistics is really dependent upon an understanding of vocabulary. Some of the statistics questions that can come up on the Regents really just require you to puzzle through some scenarios to answer the questions. So here's some vocabulary that we need to understand. Biased. If something is biased, the definition is a little different in statistics than in just everyday conversation. It means one outcome or one portion of the population is unfairly favored more than the others. So our population or our sample isn't random. Like if I was trying to study something that was happening at Poughkeepsie High School, and my entire sample included only female students, it would be a biased population or a biased sample because it doesn't actually represent the population. So ideally, unbiased studies have a completely random sample. A census is a survey or poll of everyone in the population. We do have a U.S. census that helps us gives us statistics about our population. And then these last two kind of go together. Understanding what an observational study is and what an experimental study is. So in an observational study, treatments are not imposed, no causation can be established. So we need to know that when we're observing things, all we can see is what is happening now. We can't be sure of what caused an outcome. We're just gathering data. With an experiment, we can conclude causation. We can say, okay, we introduced some kind of effect to one portion of the population. So if something happened, we can assume it's because of what we introduced. So we can determine causation. So let's see if we can use that new understanding of vocabulary to work through exercise 5. Which statement about statistical studies is true? So statement 1. Survey of all English classes in a high school would be a good sample to determine the number of hours students throughout the school spend studying. So we have to ask ourselves, is looking at all of the English classes an unbiased sample of the population? Is it random? Well, we're looking at all English classes. Do all students take English class? Yes. If you're only looking at honors English classes, it might not work out because we have a very specific subset of the population. But if we're looking at all English classes, that could be fine, I believe. So we're going to say because everyone takes an English class. And that's every year. You take it freshman year, you sophomore year, junior year, senior year, you always take English. So I think that that's good. We can say that that is true. Now, if this was a test I was taking, I wouldn't necessarily go through all of them. Now that I know that one is true, I know I can eliminate choice 2 and choice 4 because neither of them include one. And I can actually just test now choice 3. But we're going to go through each of them to make sure we understand the vocabulary here. So number 2. A survey of all 9th graders in a high school would be a good sample to determine the number of student parking spaces needed. Now, is that an appropriate group to answer this question? 9th graders don't drive. They're too young, so that's not an appropriate group. So that would be my reasoning there. 9th graders don't drive. So that would be a biased sample. I mean, it's not really biased because it's not random. It just doesn't actually support the population that you're looking for. All right, choice 3. A survey of all students in one lunch period in a high school would be a good sample to determine the number of hours adults spend on social media websites. Well, if they were talking about students here, this would be a good random sample because it should cover the entire population in general. But because it's asking about the number of hours adults spend on social media, I think that would be silly because we're not asking adults. So that just doesn't make sense. Unless we're asking them about their parents, but I don't think that's the case here. All right, one more. Again, now I already know what my answer is. My answer is choice number 1, but let's read 4. A survey of all calculus students in a high school would be a good sample to determine the number of students throughout school who don't like math. Well, that would just be silly, because if you're taking calculus, there's a good chance that you do like math. That just does not make sense. So there we go. We can eliminate that. All right, sometimes you just have to puzzle through it. There's not necessarily something clear cut. If it says this, do that. If it says that, do this. We have to read through it and try and draw an educated conclusion. All right, this one is a little more clear cut. A doctor wants to test the effectiveness of a new drug on her patients. She separates her sample patients into 2 groups and administers the drug only to one of those groups. She then compares the results. Which type of study best describes this situation? Well, this is not a census. It does not check with every member of the population. This is just a doctor with some of her patients. It's not a survey. The patients aren't answering any questions here. It's either an observation or a controlled experiment. Observations cannot determine causation. You don't actually do anything. You just observe. Controlled experiments, however, can determine causation. There's a control group and an experimental group. We are administering the drug to one group and not to the other. We can determine causation here. This is what the doctor is doing.